What's up everyone? It's been a while since I made one of these guides, so welcome to the Sloshing Machine Guide. The Sloshing Machine was one of the most meta-defining weapons early on in Splatoon 3, but due to some notable nerfs and changes in the meta, the weapon has fallen off a bit in favor of its second kit and the original Slosher. But this weapon is still really strong, and in this guide, I'm going to teach you the basics on how you should be playing this weapon after receiving these nerfs. In this video, we're going over the vanilla machine, and for part 2, I'll be covering the machine Neo. The best way to be kept up to date on when part 2 releases is by subscribing to the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and subscribe. Like I said before, it helps out in the YouTube algorithm of promoting this video. With that out of the way, let's get straight into talking about the Sloshing Machine. Let's first start off with the history of the Sloshing Machine. This weapon was first introduced in Splatoon 1 alongside the regular Slosher and Tri-Slosher. The Sloshing Machine is basically how it sounds and how it looks. It was designed after a washing machine. Its design has largely stayed the same over the years, with the weapon maintaining the overall shape of it, but having some changes to the rim and color. Rather than being given that primarily white with gray on the bottom look that it had in Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2, in Splatoon 3, the colors were swapped, giving it a sleek gray design with some additional washing machine-like features. Compared to the standard Slosher, it has a slower fire rate, but has a slightly higher damage output, and its most unique trait is its Vortex Spiral Shot that has a huge hitbox. The vanilla machine kits historically have always been a bit underwhelming, but Splatoon 3 changed that forever. In Splatoon 1, it came with Splat Bomb and Bomb Rush, whereas in Splatoon 2, it had Auto Bomb and Stingray. Two kits that for the most part did not see a high usage in competitive. But fast forward to Splatoon 3, it got one of the best kits it could ever have in the franchise with Fizzy Bomb and Booyah Bomb. Given the damage this weapon did in the early meta of Splatoon 3, Nintendo gave it 4 nerfs to tone it down, so in today's environment, Machine's playstyle is really centered around positioning and spacing. You have to remember that Machine is still a frontline weapon, but it now has a slower kill time, so you space out your opponents, bait them in, so they can play at your range and within your area of effect. It's important to always be in relevant positions to do damage. Basically, Machine as a main weapon is good at walling people out or picking them off if you position correctly. And the cool thing about attempting to position and space correctly is that the sub and special for this kit complement how Machine plays as an AoE weapon while covering some notable weaknesses of the main weapon itself. With Fizzy Bomb, it gives the Machine the ability to paint, combo with the weapon, create area denial, cause significant chip damage, fulfilling your role as an AoE weapon while being a cheap sub for the most part given all the stuff that it's able to do. As for the special, Booyah Bomb gives you a tool at area denial where it helps you in displacing the enemy contesting the objective or maintaining positions. It extends Machine's range and it adds on to the overall objective of the weapon. Basically, what I want you to take away from this kit is that its success is dependent on your spacing and positioning. The nerfs to the weapon have made it slow, and in any meta where speed is the focus, such as a tacticooler meta, Machine players might struggle, but if you learn how to bait players in awkward positions that are favorable to the Machine, you can thrive with this kit. So, how do you do this? Well, let's take a closer look at the main weapon strengths so you can see why spacing and positioning is important and it'll help you in the long run. The main strengths that define this weapon is its high damage, strafe speed, and most importantly, its range and hitbox. Starting off with the damage, Machine has 2 different damage values depending on what part of the spiral the enemy is hit by. If the enemy is hit by the top of the spiral, it will do a 76 direct damage. And when you hit someone with the top of the spiral, visually you'll see a white flash cutting in half and you'll hear a sharp piercing noise. This is helpful to know because as a bucket player, you will sometimes be playing around cover or under ledges where you may or may not have direct line of sight on the enemy. So regardless of your location, if you hit the enemy with the spiral, you'll still see them and hear the slosh pierce. As for its second damage value, it does an indirect damage of 38. Basically, any part that is not the top of the spiral will do 38 damage. Visually, you'll see a small white flash and you'll hear a low tap from the slosh instead. I highly recommend that you practice hitting direct hits of 76 because it does higher damage and improves consistency in picking off the opponent. Given that the frame reduction nerf happened to consecutive sloshes, you want to make your initial sloshes count. So if you miss, you slow down your kill time, making it easier for the enemy to finish you off instead. But even with this slower kill time, it's always important to remember that you're a bucket player. If you're a bucket player, be sure to play around obstacles and ledges to make it harder for the enemy to hit you and make it easier for you to hit them. Also remember that damage fall off does exist for this weapon, so if you're on high ground and you're shooting at someone below you, there might be some fall off damage. Sloshing Machine also has the best overall strafe speed among all the sloshers. The movement speed while firing is set to 0.07 units per frame. So when you compare this to the regular slosher as an example, you can see the machine is able to move faster while firing side to side. Use this to your advantage when spacing the enemy away from you. And last but not least is Machine's biggest strengths, its good range combined with its amazing hitbox. If your crosshair hits the enemy torso, even if it's not in the center, you could still cause 76 damage. The hitbox is noticeable for the indirect values as well, because the hitbox extends to the tips of the spiral. So your aim could be slightly off from the enemy, but you can still cause damage. This is very notable when you compare the hitbox to the regular slosher. So if you're questioning whether to play regular slosher versus machine because they have interchangeable roles, hint hint, it's probably because of its hitbox. You also have to consider the map or mode, which we'll discuss later in the video. When you combine all these elements of its high damage potential, its strafe speed, its big hitbox and good range, on top of it being a bucket where it's really good playing around obstacles and ledges, you can see why you want to position correctly. Take this clip as an example. The blaster rushes me, but rather than playing at their range, I bait them to get the pick, and then I follow up killing the other two while playing around cover. Because if someone shot back at me, I could have easily backed up and just started aiming in the general direction of the tower to hit them. I play at my range and the positions that I feel comfortable picking them off with the sloshing machine. Moving on to its weaknesses, Machine has two glaring problems to its kit, starting off with its ink consumption. Machine was always on the ink hungrier side of the slosher weapon class, but given the nerfs it's received over the years, this trait has become even more apparent. Each slosh takes around 9.2% of ink, which allows you to fire 10 times on a full ink tank. So this weapon will not be outputting a tremendous amount of paint. This will impact how you maintain map control for yourself and your team, but also your special output. Machine is one of the few weapons that has a 220p special, so having an ink-hungry weapon that doesn't paint well will give you a hard time of getting Booyah Bombs. There are ways to minimize this problem, which I'll go over in the ability section. Given this problem, this kit will be dependent on the rest of the team composition to provide paint and map control to allow the machine to do its job comfortably. This is something to be very wary about because you're a frontline and most Slayer weapons in the front are more ink efficient than Machine. Its second weakness is its fire rate. The nerf it received in 4.0 increased the frames for continuous swings from 33 frames to 38 frames. This basically means that after your first initial slosh, every consecutive slosh is slower. But this is why I said earlier that it's important to get used to your direct shots because your initial sloshes will matter a lot since its frame rate was unchanged. This kit is just slow at what it wants to do, and you gotta be aware of that. Slow kill time, bad paint coverage, slow special output. So it's important to focus on its strengths while being aware of the weaknesses to control the pace of the match. Luckily, these two weaknesses can also be minimized by its sub, Fizzy Bomb. Fizzy Bomb is one of the most versatile subs in the game. It only costs 60% of your ink tank, but it can paint, poke, deny entry, assist with movement, and combo with other weapons, which is really good for Machine. To cover how to use Fizzy Bomb quickly, because I get asked this a lot on my YouTube shorts, Fizzy Bomb damage and speed is dependent on the charge mechanic. When you throw it without a charge, it'll be thrown in a straight line with a direct damage of 50 and an indirect damage of 35. But by holding the R button, you can charge the Fizzy Bomb and it'll give you more range, more paint, and apply more damage. You can also speed up its charge time if you mash the jump button, move the L stick back and forth, or move your control with motion controls. You could do one or a combination of these to speed up your charge. Visually, you'll know when it's fully charged when it clicks twice and 2 additional circles appear on the sub-throwing reticle. That is how you use Fizzy with your controller, so now let's talk about how to use Fizzy with Machine. It basically goes like this. You use Fizzy to pressure the enemy outside of Machine's range, create combo opportunities between the main and the sub, and to help with Machine's pain output and movement. First, let's cover the picking and combo potential of just the sub itself. Like I said earlier, one direct hit from the Fizzy Bomb does 50 damage, and one indirect hit does 35 damage. So as long as someone is within Fizzy's range, at minimum, all you need is 2 direct hits or all indirect hits to take out the enemy. This is good because if someone is outside Machine's range, tossing Fizzies can help in contesting people that are far away. You throw Fizzies in locations where you want to deny entry, whether it's from an objective or certain strong positions on maps. And it can also help with your spacing and positioning. If you throw Fizzy towards an enemy, you've weakened them, making it easier for you to play around them and pick them off. Just one Machine direct of 76 and a minimum of one Fizzy Bomb indirect of 35 is enough to combo. So imagine if you throw a fully charged Fizzy towards an enemy, you can weaken them to the point where you can get in position and throw a direct or indirect Machine hit. And remember, because of Machine's big hitbox, as long as you're in a relevant position, the AoE combined with the Machine and the Fizzy Bombs will make it easier for you to damage the enemy. Its other strength is that Fizzy Bomb is able to paint extremely well, and with the right gear, you can improve your paint output, minimizing one of the weaknesses of Machine. What I also like about Fizzy Bomb is that it kinda acts like a curling bomb. And this is helpful because Machine is slow, so having that movement option could help you get out of a bad situation. But even with all this versatility, Fizzy Bomb has a couple of weaknesses for Machine. Earlier I said it's pretty ink efficient for all the things it can do, but because Machine as a main weapon is still ink hungry, chugging out 60% of your ink could put you in bad spots. Throwing one Fizzy Bomb leaves you with 4 sloshes. So if you're not careful of your surroundings, someone could shark, wait for you to throw the Fizzy Bomb, and then catch you from the sides. The other weaknesses of Fizzy Bomb compared to other subs is that it's slower to achieve its full strength. For example, with Burst Bomb or Splat Bomb, you just throw it and you're done, right? But with Fizzy Bomb, you have to charge it up to get the maximum value. And the issue with that is that there's a small amount of time where you're vulnerable. During the charge animation, someone can rush you, and especially if someone has Tacticooler, they're just gonna go up to you and pick you off. This is why it's important to be aware of your surroundings before throwing a Fizzy Bomb. But if you find yourself in a bad spot, you could potentially get away with it with some helpful ink armor. Now hold up, I know what you're saying, comment section. Booyah Bomb is not ink armor. But one of the strengths of Booyah Bomb is that it gets coated in ink armor, giving Machine a strong special to improve its survivability and more. As the name suggests, Booyah Bomb is a special charged by booyahs from yourself and from your teammates. Once you've reached the maximum charge, you can throw the Booyah Bomb in the direction that you choose. Once the Booyah Bomb lands on a direct surface, it'll explode and expand. It's important to know that it needs to land on a solid surface, so if it goes through a grate, the Booyah Bomb will go right through it. The damage values also depend on the radius of where the enemy is within the Booyah Bomb and how long they stay within the damage radius. That being said, the benefits of having Booyah Bomb on this kit is that it perfects the identity of this weapon, which is area denial and strong positioning. Booyah Bomb can displace opponents and control the objective, while giving Machine another tool to attack and paint from a distance. This is why this kit is considered one of the best kits to ever be designed in Splatoon history because of its synergy. Each element of the main, sub, and special complement each other. It's a great special for Machine, so let's take a deeper dive on tips on how to use this special. The most basic example is using Booyah Bomb to deny entry. For example, if the enemy team is attempting to contest the objective, Booyah Bomb threatens and forces the enemy to give up the objective in some cases. I think Booyah Bomb tends to be the strongest in tower control, given that it is a GG special. What that basically means is that the enemy could be on tower in overtime, but because of your Booyah Bomb, you could force them off and send one of your teammates to get on the tower to end the game. The special does not necessarily only need to be used on the objective, but can be used in areas where you want to force the enemy to move or get rid of them entirely. Alongside its ability to displace, it also paints pretty well and destroys all bombs and in some specials that are within its damage, And remember, because it paints outward, the enemy can still paint over it, but it's arguably one of the better specials when it comes to retake in Splatoon 3. Some other unique strengths of this special is that how long you can hold this special and the HP it provides to you while in the special. The special lasts 9 seconds, giving you a lot of time to hold that special before throwing it. And it has a good enough range where you could safely throw the special into an area. And remember how I said you get some ink armor? With this special, you're given ink armor with a total health points of 470. The 9 seconds in ink armor are helpful in improving your survivability. If someone tries to rush you down, you can use your specials to keep yourself alive and call over your teammates or threaten those enemies with the Booyah Bomb. Overall, this special gives Machine another tool to deny entry into areas, to retake the objective, improve its survivability, and to exert pressure on the enemy to improve your positioning. I also want you to be aware of the weaknesses with this special since it'll help you bring out the strengths of it. First, you are vulnerable during the charging phase of the special. While yes, it does give you ink armor, you're still a sitting duck until you reach the maximum charge of your special and you're able to throw it. This means that the enemy can shred your armor and take you out. And there are some weapons and specials that do this extremely well. For example, playing against Stamper could be a bane of your existence because if they know how to time their slashes correctly, they could actually one-shot you after you land from the Booyah Bomb. It's also important to note that you don't receive the ink armor immediately. There are a couple of frames from when you leave the ground into the air where you can still receive damage before you get the ink armor. Another thing to consider is that while this special can be thrown quickly, because the special explodes and expands outward, it's not an instant explosion, so it gives some people enough time to react. It's also one of those specials that is countered by ink vac. Ink vac can directly suck up the special, so pay attention if there's an ink vac user on the enemy team. My advice during these type of situations is assess what's going on the field. With Booyah Bomb you have 9 seconds, right? But with ink vac, the more it gets filled up, the less time it has, so try to wait out the ink vac, relying on your team to actually fill it up for you. These are the two main weaknesses when it comes to Booyah Bomb, but as you continue to play with the weapon, you'll start to see other potential weaknesses, and you'll eventually get used to the do's and the don'ts with Booyah Bomb. Moving on to our next section, Advanced Techniques for Machine. I am using the term techniques loosely here, so think of the following advice as extra tips for the main weapon. Number 1, opening your map. The benefit of using any bucket is that you don't need to directly see the enemy to pick them off. If you hit them once, open your map quickly, track their movement, and aim in that general direction, and you may be able to potentially finish them off. Remember, Machine's hitbox is huge, so one indirect can tell you where the enemy is, and this could be helpful for tracking for you or when you call it out for your teammates. And to be clear, I'm not saying you have to do this all the time. It's just a neat trick that you can do when you don't have a direct line of sight on the enemy and you want to be able to track them. If you could still see them, just aim in that general direction. The Machine's hitbox will likely hit them. For number 2, arching. With most sloshers, you're able to manipulate the slosh in some shape or form. For example, with Slosher and Dreadringer, you're able to flick your sloshes. With Machine, while you're not able to flick your shots, you're still able to manipulate the arch of the slosh. Remember that with Machine, you have a spiral-like slosh. Depending on the angle of how you slosh, it'll determine how wide or tight the spiral can be. This is helpful when you're trying to hit an enemy that is behind the wall or any sharp corners that are difficult for you to see. And hold up, comment section, I know you could easily just back up a little bit so you can have a better angle, but the reason I think this is just good to know is because playing alongside a wall makes it harder for certain weapons to hit you. For example, shooters need direct line of sight to fight you, so if you're attached to the wall, you're just making it harder for them to hit you, but because you're a bucket, you can hit them from weird angles. From my experience, Machine can hit sharper angles than Slosher. A Slosher can throw sloshes over a wall or a ledge, but depending on how the enemy positions themselves against the wall or the ledge, they can avoid the wave of ink being thrown towards them. But if it's a Machine throwing their sloshes, because of how sharp the spiral is, there are some angles that are just easier to hit with this weapon compared to the regular Slosher. So when you combine this with opening your map, you can develop a habit of locating enemies and hitting them behind sharp ledges. As for what map and mode are good for Machine, all Slosher weapons are good on maps like Mako Mart, Flounder Heights, and Humpback Pump Track. But there are some unique map and mode combinations where Machine in particular thrives. If you play Machine, you might also play Slosher because they both share that midline aggro weapon role that can play in the front lines. Because it shares that role with Slosher, it's important to know which maps Machine might perform better in. From my experience and observations, you mainly switch off Slosher to Machine when the map needs you to have the bigger hitbox. So for example, using Machine on maps such as EOTail and Mincemeat Metalworks, specifically on zones, are two good picks where Machine is preferred. Both maps have steep and wide ledges, so having the extra hitbox from Machine is preferable. Machine as a main weapon is also stronger on tower control in comparison to the other modes, and in comparison to Slosher. I find it a lot easier to hit people on tower with Machine because of its hitbox. This isn't to say that you should use Machine only on tower control map, but if you find yourself on a TC map like Museum or Sturgeon, Machine could be a better pick. But also remember that Slosher has an advantage over Machine on tower control because it has another displacement special that can do a similar job that is 20 points for special cheaper. I think Machine is strong on all maps and all modes, but I think it's the best on TC. But my advice is to experiment with maps and modes that you feel abuse Machine's strengths. More importantly, all of this depends on your team composition. If you don't have the right team composition to support Machine, even if you switch from Slosher to Machine or pick a map where Machine is really good, you could struggle. So let's talk about the factors you want to consider when developing a team composition with Machine in it. When it comes to team composition, paint and chip damage are Machine's best friends. Some weapons that paint well while providing chip damage are frontline weapons like Splash, the Splatter Shots, N-Zap, and backlines like Blue Pencil and Ballpoint. There are other weapons that can also provide chip damage and paint of course, but these are traditionally what pair well because of their paint output and the damage values that these weapons can do that'll combo with Machine as a main weapon and with its Fizzy Bombs. For example, Splash pretty much combos with everything. It paints really well, and it has a burst bomb and a crab tank that apply significant damage where Machine can use its different damage values to take them out. Whereas backlines like Pencil, it just paints a ton and one of its 68 damage shots can combo with the 35 indirect shot from Machine. If you want to get very experimental on Slosher dominant maps like Flounder Heights and Humpback Pump Track, I've seen weapons like Entry, Dynamo, and Dreadringer all perform well with Machine because of their painting and AoE strengths. Basically, your team composition should be centered around giving you paint to reduce your ink consumption weakness, and having teammates with mains, subs, and specials that do a minimum of 65 damage so that you're able to combo with Machine's different damage values. Unlike the Slosher and Tri-Slosher that I've developed guides for in the past, Sloshing Machine is very different when it comes to abilities. Rather than using abilities such as Quick Respawn, you use abilities that improve its movement or its ink efficiency. Starting off with its exclusive abilities, Last Ditch Effort, Comeback, and Stealth Jump are all popular picks for this Machine variant. Last Ditch Effort is an ability that when you meet the time or point conditions, you will receive Ink Saver Main, Ink Saver Sub, and Ink Recovery Up. The game does not do a good job explaining this ability, so let's briefly cover it. At maximum, LDE gives you 18 ability points for each ability, which is close to almost receiving 2 mains worth of those abilities. You get these abilities when there is 30 seconds left in the match, or more importantly, on how much the enemy team has scored. Once the enemy scores at minimum 50 points, you start accumulating ability points with each point decrease. And once the enemy has reached 30 points, you will get the maximum effect. It may seem like you only get this benefit when you're losing, but given how some games can go back and forth, having the ink efficiency advantage with Machine could help you turn around the game. If ink efficiency is one of your biggest issues with Machine, this ability can minimize it. Comeback is also a popular alternative. Having Comeback gives you 1 main's worth of the following abilities focused on movement, ink efficiency, and special charge for 20 seconds after you respawn from an enemy taking you out. In a meta centered around fighting and using Tacticooler, Comeback might be preferred over LDE. Cooler's insta respawn time makes this ability even better because with Cooler, the benefit of dying is that you respawn faster, and if you have Comeback on, you will come back onto the state with boosted abilities. I think in a Cooler meta, you get more usage out of Comeback than you get out of LDE. My advice when picking between the two is look at the map and the mode. If the map is very snowbally where people can easily drop you to 30 points, or if it's splat zones, use LDE. If not, use comeback. But this is all personal preference as well. If you have ink efficiency issues, it might be better to use LDE. If you like the special charge and mobility aspects, use comeback. Stealth jump is also self-explanatory. This ability helps you get into the map undetected if the enemy's not close to you. Since you are a weapon that plays in the front lines, you will likely die at some points, and having this ability helps you get back into the fight faster rather than swimming back in. As for main abilities, you primarily focus on movement abilities with run speed and swim speed. Run speed increases the movement speed when firing the weapon, and with Sloshing Machine's already good mobility and strafing, run speed helps in following up or evading the enemy. As for swim speed, it helps Machine to close the distance towards an enemy, more quickly responding to enemy pushes, or even escaping unfavorable situations. Which ability you tend to use more is all personal preference. I personally run a mixture of both because I feel like the movement abilities help Machine spacing and positioning in the game. As for subs, you have a couple of options in addition to your utility subs. The two basic ones are Inksaver Main and Inksaver Sub. I highly recommend just putting one sub of Inksaver Main because it gives you an additional slosh from 10 sloshes to 11 sloshes. If you do happen to have extra room for subs, running 3 Inksaver Main subs increases it from 10 to 12 sloshes. You can also just consider just running one main of this ability since it also increases it to 12. How much Inksaver Main you put on your gear is really dependent on you. If you feel like you have really bad ink management, try to experiment. But if you don't have a lot of gear freedom, I probably would just say use LDE. It'll help you with your ink management. And if you do decide to wear LDE, I recommend using at least one sub of Inksaver Sub, because when LDE is at its maximum value, just one additional sub of Inksaver Sub allows Machine to throw 2 Fizzy Bombs. And having 2 Fizzy Bombs can be helpful when attempting to contest the zones or charging up your special for Booyah Bomb. Feel free to experiment, but these are abilities I found to be the most helpful and consistent when it comes to Machine. Machine is clearly not what it used to be in the early days of Splatoon 3, and while it slightly fell off, I feel like it's starting to see more use again. I mostly see the Neo variant, but we can talk about that for the second part of this guide. But after getting back into the weapon and developing this guide, I'm convinced that this weapon still has a place in this game and potentially this meta. There is no denying that Machine has one of the best kits ever in Splatoon history across all games, and this will forever be one of my favorite weapons in the entire franchise. If you feel like there is something I missed in this guide, post it in the comments below, or if there's something specific you want me to clarify on or follow up on, feel free to ask me and I could potentially create a YouTube short answering that question. This is the end of part 1 for the Machine guide. For part 2, we'll take a look at the Machine Neo. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And like always, thank you so much for watching.